Irina doesn't want me to introduce her. She's very modest. Or take up any of her time, yeah. So we're going to get started, and I just wanted to briefly introduce this session. It was last year at the core meeting where we had a discussion on multilingualism in repositories and supporting different languages, non-English languages, or multilingual content. And with that, after that meeting, there was enough interest with the core members that we decided to launch a working group. And we're very, very lucky to have Irina leading this effort because, well, she has a wealth of experience. As you know, she's a program officer with EIFL. She's very active in Europe and many other regions of the world, and has been for many years, and is also a very amazing person to work with. And so the reason why this multilingualism is so important for us is that it's fundamental for ensuring bibliodiversity in the scholarly ecosystem. And as we all know, there has been a lot of pressure on scientists and researchers to publish in the English language. And maybe the pendulum has gone too far in that direction, and we need to develop some practices so that non-English language content is assessed and considered at the same level as content in English. So on that note, I will turn it over to Irina, who's going to introduce the other speakers and manage this session. Irina.
Thanks a lot, Kathleen. So that's a working group that Kathleen mentioned. We have a page on core website, and if you're not a member yet but would like to be, if we will inspire you enough today, please consider joining. We started in August last year with a series of use cases, and some of current use cases we're discussing will be presented now. But basically a short outline of those use cases is how can we as repositories ensure better findability, discoverability of content in all the languages, helping users, helping repositories really curate repository content in other languages in a bit more efficient way, and also enable better discovery and aggregation systems. So that's a current list of working group members, and apologies, we're so many that it was hard to have it bigger, and I would like to thank everyone who contributed. And once again, if someone wants to join, please do. And now we'll hear these three wonderful people whom you see here online, plus Marisa, who is here with us in the room. So we'll start with my colleague Milica Shevkusic, who is a librarian at the Institute of Technical Sciences of the Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts. And then we'll have Pierre Lassou, who is a librarian at Université Laval in Canada, and also Tomasz Nukbauer, who is a digital projects and system development librarian at Concordia University. And Marisa will speak from the room. So then I'll stop sharing and hand it over to you, Milica, to start. And maybe I need Carla's help to stop sharing, or maybe you just try sharing your screen. Oh, I think I figured it out.
Unfortunately, I can't yet.
So you should be able to share. So over to you. And for the format, each one of them will speak for about 10-15 minutes. So I suggest that we listen to a talk, then have questions, then move to another one.
Hello, everyone. I hope you don't mind if I put it like this without going to presentation mode, because it's...
So maybe a little bit louder, Milica.
Yeah, okay, I'll try. Can you hear me now better?
Can we make it a little bit more louder?
I can't make it louder on my part. I can only switch the device.
Please carry on.
Okay. So hello, everyone. I will cover one of the use cases. And actually, this use case just popped up in the first round of discussions. We didn't cover it in the initial document because we were somewhere close to this topic, and the topic is handling various characters that are not the Latin alphabet and various alphabets and writing systems. So we were somewhere around this topic, but we didn't cover it because for some reason we didn't realize it was actually genuinely related to the topic of multilingual metadata. And it appeared in the first round of discussions, and then we decided to include it in a way, in a quite extensive way in our document. So this topic, the main thing that should be understood, this is that this topic is not related only to the digital context, not only to repositories. This is an old topic, and it actually appeared throughout history. For example, when the various Slavonic and German populations inhabited the Europe, they adopted the Latin alphabet, and actually Latin alphabet was used to capture their languages. Also missionaries who translated the Bible in various languages. For example, you have the Quechua Bible, where the indigenous language is actually captured using the Latin alphabet. The same happened in Africa, the same happened in China. So it's an old issue, an old practice that is deeply rooted of actually transcribing and expressing the languages from related to various traditions in an alphabet that is dominant in Europe. Later on, we had the problem of printing media, writing media, etc. So if you have a printing press that uses the Latin alphabet, then you are limited. You have to translate the content, to adjust the content to this. So it kept on going. And then when computers appeared, we had various encoding systems that couldn't cover all the characters used in various languages, and we had these basic character sets that were used initially, even some characters from the Latin alphabet with diacritics used in French or in, for example, Central European Slavonic languages. They couldn't be expressed because the characters were missing. So people typed without using these characters. And cataloging systems adjusted to this. So we have various transcription and transliteration rules that we apply to actually express various languages and various alphabets and describe publications in library catalogs. So you can see a list of examples for those, we call them legacy character encoding systems. Now we should be using the UTF-8, which is Unicode, which should cover the full set, but probably even this one can't cover everything. So then we get to so we get to some definitions that we used in our document, and we have several approaches there.
Maybe remember to speak a little bit slower, because we have simultaneous translation.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks.
No problem. So we have transliteration, transcription, and romanizations as the terms that we used in this document, and as the terms that are used in literature. So transliteration is when you render characters from the source language using the characters in the target language, and these characters sound similar. So you actually change the text letter for letter, and it looks similar no matter how it is pronounced. In transcriptions, you actually do this conversion based on pronunciation. So you have a word pronounced in one way in the source language. And then in the target language, you use the similar sounds, no matter about the characters, but you use similar sounds to express this, to actually convert it and to make it readable to a different audience. And in romanization is actually transliteration into the Latin alphabet, or the Roman alphabet, as we call it. So any foreign language, when it's transliterated into Latin letters, that's what we call romanization. So on the right, you have an example. Greek is a good a language that provides good examples. So in the first case, we have in the first row, we have the Greek word written as it's written in Greek. In the second row, we have this word transliterated. So we are using Latin alphabet, and these letters are actually similar letters. So this G is actually corresponds to this G in Greek. And in transcription, we have this word as it would be pronounced. So when a person who reads the Latin alphabet reads it, it sounds quite similar to this Greek word. So these are the main concepts that we dealt with when discussing our recommendations. So let's proceed. So here is an example, quite a picturesque example. So I took Bulgarian as example because this is a language that is quite similar to my mother tongue and I can understand, but the same applies to Chinese, to Arabic, to various other languages. We have this same problem, this same issue related to transliteration and transcription. So here, this is an example from a repository. This is a Flemish repository, and there are several documents by the same author in this repository, and these documents are written in Bulgarian. Because the author is an expert, he's Flemish, but he's an expert in the Bulgarian language. So the top example is the record in the repository. You can see that the title is transliterated into the Latin alphabet. It's Romanized, and you also have the title in English. So this first part of the title is transliterated title from Bulgarian, because the document is in Bulgarian. Down there you have the screenshot of the original article, and you can see that it is in the Cyrillic alphabet. It's in Bulgarian. And what is interesting, the name of the author, which is here written as it's written in it's originally written, it is actually transcribed into Bulgarian, because in Bulgarian, just like in Serbian, Ukrainian, Russian, and also some other languages like Lithuanian and Latvian, which don't use Cyrillic like Bulgarian, but Latin alphabet names are transcribed, and there are some rules how to transcribe these names into this different alphabets, and to make them closer to the local audience, so that the local audience knows how to pronounce it, these names. So it's very interesting, because the author, he's Flemish, but his names here and his institution are written in Bulgarian. And then in the repository, this title is transliterated. It's interesting that in the same repository, we have other papers by the same author, and some of them have titles in Bulgarian, in Cyrillic, in the repository. So instead of this, it's written in Cyrillic. And also some of them use a different transliteration standard, because there are multiple transliteration standards. And here you can see an example how this looks. So there are multiple transliteration standards that are used for Bulgarian, Cyrillic. Also, there are multiple standards for Chinese, for Arabic, for Hebrew, for various languages. And that's what makes the situation difficult. So it's original. in Cyrillic. And this same title can be transliterated in various ways. And one of the most commonly used is this Library of Congress guides, Library of Congress standards that are used in library catalogs and are very, very widespread and are used by many journals. But on the other hand, researchers prefer this British standard or even this official Bulgarian. So each language has kind of set of commonly accepted transliteration standards. So why is this important? We have this combination of characters that is quite difficult to render when typing. So it often happens that people just omit the sign, this diacritic sign above A. And then if you try to reconstruct using the same tables, the same guidelines, you try to reconstruct the original spelling, you get this, which is different from this, and it's pronounced differently. And this is where errors are generated. So what is important and what we kept in mind when developing our guidelines was to do things in a way that this conversion, back conversion, reconstruction of the original spelling can be done correctly. Because in this way, you just keep on producing errors, and these errors multiply because these records are transferred from one system, from one catalog to another, from one repository to another. So this is something that we should keep in mind. The most commonly used in libraries are these Library of Congress romanization tables, transliteration tables. However, they're not always the most suitable, and there were discussions around this because we should keep in mind that we shouldn't be discussing this topic only from the point of view of the Western civilization, because there are other transliteration contexts. For example, in the countries that use the Cyrillic alphabet, they transcribe or transliterate into Cyrillic. Also, in other contexts, you could have, for example, transliteration between Arabic and Tamil on other combinations of languages. And I include some use cases here, some texts that are interesting to read. For example, the first explains the situation in Hebrew, where historically the same alphabet is used to express various languages, and the transliteration rules that apply to those languages are different. So if you want to do this correctly, you have to be knowledgeable of these differences, and you actually need some expert knowledge. And also this Arabic to Tamil and vice versa, this is another example. So in some parts of the world, Romanization doesn't solve the problem because the Latin alphabet is not something that is easily used and read by the community that uses repository. And this is something that we should keep in mind as well, that the users of repository matter. And also what we have now, the situation that we have now in repositories is that the situation is mixed, like the example I mentioned. So some records are transliterated, some are not. With the rise of UTF-8, we are increasingly often writing the titles and the names as they are written in the original publications. So we should also handle this complicated situation. And then we developed some recommendations which are subject to discussion, and we would like to hear your opinion as well. So our main recommendation, not only regarding this particular topic and the mentioned use cases, but also other topics, is to enable UTF support in the repository and to use the original alphabet writing system whenever possible. This may not be accessible to all users in the world, but there are other ways to make it easier. You can suggest where they can try to, tools are available on the internet where they can check what a title means, or where they can transliterate automatically the names, etc. But in this way, we avoid creating errors like the one I mentioned previously. So with omitting some characters and making correcting reconstruction impossible. Transcription should be avoided whenever possible, although some languages like Korean, like Chinese, they prefer it's transcription is more suitable for these languages. It should be avoided because it's difficult to reconstruct, because we sometimes rules are not clear. In some languages, we have very clear rules how to do this. But in some languages, we have multiple standards that apply, and they are not applied consistently. So in case transliteration is inevitable, you should try to choose one standard. For example, if you have some technical limitations that you cannot use UTF-8 or similar limitations, then use one standard and declare this standard in somewhere in a visible place in the repository, in the frequently asked questions, in user manual, somewhere on about pages, so that people know where to go to reconstruct the original titles and names. And if it's not possible to use a single standard, then mention on the same in the same places, mention all the standards that are used. I can say that in my repository, we had some metadata imported from different systems, from library catalogs or some older databases, and they were transliterated. And over time, we managed to curate these records and to replace them with the UTF-8 original titles. So there should be a kind of a plan, but you should be very transparent if you're using transliteration or even transcription. If you have to, then write down that so that users know which standards are you relying on. So you can also mention if you're using, for example, Library of Congress guidelines, they then provide a link where they can go and see these tables. There are also some websites. Unfortunately, these websites are often unofficial and they're not always well maintained. But if there is a reliable website like this one for Hebrew that we mentioned here, also mention these links in these pages, about pages, or where you mention these standards. We also had a discussion about author names, and our recommendation is to write author names as they are in the original alphabet using the UTF-8 encoding, but to provide an ORCID or other persistent identifier that is relevant for authors, so that various name variants can be connected. So this is also subject to discussion, but our opinion was that we should adjust these recommendations to the wide variety of languages and to various contexts throughout the world, and not limit it to what is common in one part of the Europe, using predominantly the English language. So this last slide actually introduces the other topic. So it's partly related to encodings. In repositories, this is from this space. It is impossible. It's currently impossible to sort the names according to the alphabetic order of the language, the main language used. For example, on the right, you can see that this letter J, which is red here, it goes after the last letter in the alphabet, although it should go somewhere at the beginning. And you can also see, this is from a Czech repository, that this L letter used in Polish and also J used in Serbian go after the last letter in the repository. So it's impossible to put in order this sorting. So it's a technical limitation. It should be trivial, but unfortunately it persists. And my last message is that we should, in the 21st century, when we're discussing the limitations and possibilities of artificial intelligence, it's a shame that we are still struggling with the encodings and that we can't cover all the languages that there exist. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Milica.
I'll stop sharing.
Any questions, reactions to Milica's talk?
There is something
Then
here.
maybe we can move on
sharing.
to Pierre's talk, and Pierre and Tomasz will present software use cases, how DSpace and ePrints handle multilingual content. Over to you, Pierre and Tomasz. And please
Okay,
remember
can you
to
hear me?
speak slowly for simultaneous interpretation.
Yeah. Can you hear me well?
I think yes, right? Yeah, please
Okay.
carry on.
So I start. So Milica was introducing some technical issues, and we will our presentation is focused on this, on technical issues in actual repository softwares, especially DSpace and ePrints. So we will just provide examples around the technical limitation in those softwares. Our group has no formal recommendation right now for all the problems that we will show you in the next minutes, but we are working on a recommendation on this to improve the softwares. So first thing first, multilingualism is handled in repositories in a way in which the interface can be multilingual. You can change the interface. Here you see that DSpace has a lot of language by default. It has been introduced in 2005. It's a high-level configuration. You choose the language you want to use on server files configurations, and every language is a file. So you need to edit them if you want to add terms or things like this. It's community-driven, those editions of translation files. So it needs coordination. And one first problem is that when DSpace is delivering or releasing new features, usually you only have one language that is provided, which is the English one. And so when you're using your interface with other languages, you end up with what I've shown here with the print screen. So here it's a French interface we're using at my institution. And when new features are introduced, basically you see the parameters of the language and not its translation. So you need to work and propose new translation, but sometimes the release is already there. So that's one problem. The limitation with the interface, there's also one thing, it's not all the areas of the software that is covered. So you have some elements that are translated or multilingual and others that cannot. I provide some example here: community and collection metadata, submission forms, which are the pages where users are providing their content into DSpace. There's also emails. The emails is English by default, and they cannot handle multilingualism well. And the legal text too. Let's say the user license, the privacy statement, all those elements cannot be multilingual easily. A workaround is to provide the two languages or more languages in the same field, but it's not a recommended practice. I've shown this kind of practice here. We are in the collection page in French on the left and English on the right. And you see for the description, if you want it to be bilingual, you need to add the two languages in the same field so that users can see both languages. Another ability of DSpace is to provide languages at the metadata element. So here I'm illustrating it with the abstract element. When you're submitting a content, you can choose the language in which the metadata is in. So it's controlled in a way, but you have also an edit mode when the article, let's say, has been archived in the system. Then you see it this way with the two-letter code element. There's some limitation on this too. One is you don't have full control over the input. I've shown in the previous screen a drop-down list, but it's only in one page. You see this when you're providing content, but once your content is archived, you don't have this kind of control. So you may have missing content, missing attribute, or even 2 or 3 letter codes. So you don't have one specific ISO language code that is applied. Another problem is that when you're importing from other systems, which DSpace entitle you to do, you lose all this. There's no information about languages in elements. So another thing, if you're using those attributes at the elements, DSpace is handling them quite correctly, I would say, in some circumstances. Here I show it with the OAI PMH. So same example with the abstracts. I have an abstract in French and in English, and you see it here with the open air format. You can provide the languages of your abstract. So your data is exposed using the language attributes. Same thing for web services. Here is an example from DSpace API. So when you provide the information, it's exposed to external system that want to harvest it. Same example for the abstracts, like abstracts in French and abstracts in English here. And I finish with one limitation. There's one, but it's not a software limitation here. It's more about the OAI PMH specifications. Some formats allow you to display languages, others cannot. For example, if you're providing language attributes and use the Deepling Core simplified OAI PMH format, you lose all the information you put around languages of elements. And with this, I leave the floor to Tomasz for exposing you some limitation in ePrints.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to complement Pierre's description of DSpace with some comments on ePrints, which is in the end very similar to DSpace. So ePrints has had support for, like with DSpace, for multiple interface languages since for more than 10 years. And this is done using specific folders within the overall configuration files.
Sorry, Tomasz, do you mind slowing down a bit? Because you're speaking a little bit fast. Thanks.
Okay, so this is done with by having specific folders within the overall configuration, including folders for the various translations of phrases. Of course, if a phrase is missing, it will default to the English, and when new functionality is developed or added, of course, only usually just like with DSpace, only the English phrases are there, and also it's possible to release, let's say, a plugin that doesn't even use the phrases, and it just hard codes the, let's say, the English. And so the ability to provide multilingual interface is there, but with that requires a lot of coordination as well. So next slide. So the about the declaring language at the item level. So ePrints ontology has contains items which contain one or many documents which contain one or many files. And you see check marks on this slide, which is because this is working relatively well. So ePrints allows you to declare the language of a document at the document level. And this information does make its way to Dublin Core Export and OAI PMH. And so if there is more than one document, you do end up with more than one, let's say, language tag in the metadata export. The next slide. Now, this limitation really affects the support for multilingual content at various levels, and that is that overall, the language choices are set by the repository administrator globally as a setting for the repository. So this means that an administrator or developer needs to anticipate what languages will be allowed to be included in the deposited documents kind of at the outset. So a depositor, when they encounter the drop-down menu for selecting the language of their document, if they don't find their language on that list, they have to write an email to the repository administrator asking for it to be added. And so, for example, in our case, we had pre-configured certain languages that we did not actually have content in, but Hawaiian was missing. And so the depositor had the patience to write to us and ask that it be added, and we were also able to add it quickly. But really, we need something more flexible and adaptable in terms of the interface element needed for selecting the language. I am thinking of something like an autocomplete text field with a predefined long list for some control that would include some of these ISO 2-letter codes and 3-letter codes. So the design of this interface element really is something that needs to be developed further. Can we have the next slide? So now about declaring the language of a metadata field in ePrints. So although some work was done on this, and there is like a multilingual field in ePrints, it is very limited to a point of, I would argue, really needs much more work for it to be usable. So if you use this multilang field, you can select the language of the metadata along with the field, but this language information doesn't make it into any export format, including OAI PMH. If you want to switch an existing field to a multilang field, you need custom migration scripts. As I mentioned, the options for which languages are even possible or would be listed as options are controlled globally in this globally for the whole repository. And lastly, the indexing, internal search engine indexing, assumes English anyway. And although it is possible like there's some documentation on how to switch that to a different language globally. And in general, about indexing and searching, the assumption is that of English for indexing. So that includes things like stemming and stop words. There's a Xapian search engine that comes with the platform. And like I said, there is a mention in the documentation for how to change this to a different language, but there's no multilingual indexing. And so if you have more than one language of metadata, you really have to choose one. There is a plugin that was developed because ePrints has a plugin architecture, so it makes it possible for our community members to use the software to enhance it. And there is an Elasticsearch plugin that makes it possible to search in more than one language and index properly using, I think it's English and German, which was developed at the University of Zurich. So another aspect of multilingual support that is mentioned in our recommendations is that of acknowledging the translator role. And this is handled relatively well in ePrints. So this role is included in the options by default for contributors. I think those roles are coming from a Library of Congress list. But even though it's possible to link translations together through a generic sort of related URL field, so when you have two items, one is a translation, another, you can link them with this related URL. There is no kind of a dedicated semantic link for translation of linking. And so just having a related URL it's not specific enough. And so we end up using usually a custom note on a record explaining that that this item is a translation of another, and kind of list the citation of the translation there. And that's all I have to say about ePrints. And obviously I would happy to discuss more about the software and repository support for multilingual content in general.
Thank you so much, Tomasz and Pierre. Any questions, feedback to Pierre and Tomasz? Then maybe Marisa, welcome to share your reflections and Mhm.
modo presentación, no. Bueno.
¿Tienes el modo de orador?
¿Perdón? No, no, no. Bueno. Muchas gracias por invitarme a compartir la experiencia que tenemos por ahí en nuestra Universidad Nacional de La Plata. Em, Bien, ya hoy mencionó un poco Irina, pero COAR siguió para hacer esta primera recomendación y las que vendrán en casos distintos de uso y necesidades desde distintos lugares. Por un lado, los investigadores, que naturalmente desean encontrar los artículos que sean relevantes a su tema de investigación, no importa de qué lengua sean, tanto cuanto querer saber también si existe una traducción para su lengua, por ejemplo, de un artículo que está en otra. Y los gestores de repositorios tenemos también muchísimas cuestiones de uso que mejorar. Por ejemplo, una de ellas a la que direccionan estas recomendaciones es cómo etiquetar los artículos, las tesis y los distintos materiales que tenemos adentro de un repositorio para que, por un lado, los lectores humanos puedan ver esto, pero también para ofrecer metadatos que nos permitan a los sistemas relevar ese idioma y exponer también, por ejemplo, cuando nos hacen una cosecha a través del protocolo AIPMH. Los agregadores también quieren saber, digamos, conocer cuál es el idioma de los registros de los documentos que están indexados. Yo voy a mostrar acá cómo lo hacemos. Nosotros gestionamos desde mi grupo de trabajo 2 repositorios. Uno de ellos es muy grande, CEDICI, es el repositorio institucional central de la Universidad Nacional de La Plata. Tiene unos 145.000 documentos traducibles a muchos más bitstreams. Tenemos un crecimiento mensual de unos 1.000 ítems y un crecimiento del 2022 de 17.000 ítems. Y ocupamos la posición 14 en el ranking de CSIC referido a los repositorios. También gestionamos un segundo repositorio bastante más pequeño de la Comisión de Investigaciones Científicas que se llama SIG Digital, pero yo voy a ejemplificar con CEDICI. CEDICI está en la versión, CEDICI está en la versión 5.10 de DSpace y SIG Digital en la 7.3. Bueno, ya mencionaron el grupo de trabajo. En el año pasado el grupo de trabajo sacó una primera recomendación sumamente importante y que todos los registros del repositorio deben incluir una etiqueta en el campo de metadatos de idioma que identifique tanto el idioma del recurso cuanto una etiqueta que identifique el idioma de los metadatos. Incluso si los recursos están en inglés. Bueno, esto es enormemente importante y es una recomendación muy poderosa también, porque de esta manera se permite atribuir correctamente en qué lengua está el recurso, así como el descubrimiento y la indexación del mismo. La práctica, la recomendación 1, tiene primero una cuestión muy importante que es decir de qué modo se debe colocar esa etiqueta. Y la recomendación en ese aspecto es que la etiqueta sea lo más corta posible, que se exprese en la menor cantidad de letras de código necesarias para expresarla. Por ejemplo, fíjense ustedes, no sé si lo aprecian correctamente, pero creo que sí, ahí está un registro de nuestro repositorio donde DC Language está correctamente etiquetado con el mínimo de longitud. Pero uno puede ver, incluso cuando ve los registros cosechados desde distintos repositorios, que muchas veces, por ejemplo, aparece un registro que dice como idioma BR, pero también agrega una extensión que dice Brasil o PT de Portugal o así, que no debería ser utilizado. Simplemente, perdón por utilizar. Bueno, entonces, lo importante es saber cómo atribuirle el idioma a un recurso en el repositorio. Entonces, primero tenemos que identificar, como ya se mencionó, el idioma principal. Y a nivel del archivo, exponer, cuando se da el enlace, el link, la referencia a ese archivo, un atributo XML lang. Y a nivel del ítem, se debe exponer siempre que se da información sobre el ítem con un tag, que es, como lo vimos precedentemente, un DC Language. ¿Cómo es el caso en nuestro repositorio CDICI? A nivel del ítem, bueno, primero que nada, CDICI en un ítem expone solamente un registro y un archivo en una lengua, es decir, no tiene múltiples, no trabaja con múltiples lenguas. Si yo tengo un trabajo en inglés y ese mismo trabajo en español, voy a utilizar dos ítems para la descripción y agregado del bitstream en cada uno de los casos. Para cada ítem se mantiene un metadato DC Language en la base de datos y a la vez en la web para el usuario se muestra información respecto de ese lenguaje. Para Google Scholar ustedes pueden ver ahí cómo lo hacemos con un campo meta donde se describe en este caso el idioma español, y para un cosechador, por ejemplo, bajo ahí una etiqueta DC Language. Aquí al costado se puede ver en la cosecha cómo se hace la expresión, cómo es la expresión de lo que, de un set compartido para, por ejemplo, en este caso, obtener. En cuanto a la recomendación 1.2 en CDICI, a nivel de archivo no la tenemos. Es decir, lo que estábamos mencionando precedentemente era a nivel del ítem. Pero podríamos exponerlo porque al tener un ítem que está asociado únicamente a un bitstream de la misma lengua, podríamos extrapolar el idioma del bitstream, es decir, el idioma del archivo. En cuanto a la interfaz web, sea para bots y agentes de usuario y navegadores, reader, lo que sea, podríamos agregar un XML language a la etiqueta A que apunta a cada archivo bitstream, como se muestra allí. Hay una etiqueta href, un determinado ítem de un determinado bitstream y la indicación como se debería poner de language. Y en OAI-PMH también se podría agregar el atributo XMLang en los enlaces a los archivos. Por ejemplo, ahí se está mostrando cómo sería con las directrices OpenEAR 4. En cuanto a la recomendación 1.3, por los que le comentaba precedentemente, aquí se ve cómo es los ejemplos expuestos en la propia recomendación de COAR. Lo que a nosotros nos pasa es que no tenemos un recurso, o sea, un ítem con bitstream en distintas lenguas. Entonces, el ítem tiene un idioma y hay un único bitstream asociado en ese mismo idioma. En cuanto al tema del ítem, no es problema, porque uno puede agregar la posibilidad de cargar múltiples idiomas para un ítem, como mencionara precedentemente también el anterior expositor. Sin embargo, the space tiene una limitación que es que uno no puede asociar al bitstream un idioma. Entonces, digamos, cuando uno ve lo que es lo que es en la tabla de bitstream de DSpace vinculada a los datos que se tienen, no hay en relación a la tabla bitstream una tabla que pueda asociar el atributo o el metadato del idioma. Es decir, en DSpace solo se guarda el idioma por ítem, pero no se guarda por bitstream. Entonces habría que modificar el código para permitir que el idioma de un archivo bitstream igualar ese valor en un metadato que esté asociado a ese bitstream. Y en cuanto al ítem, no habría problema en hacer una indicación que tiene múltiples idiomas, pero el problema es que nunca podríamos llegar a asociar en esas variable múltiple del ítem el correlato del bitstream al que está asociado. ¿Cómo atribuir el idioma cuando más de un idioma en el campo de metadatos? Eso también es posible. Por ejemplo, acá Coar menciona una serie de ejemplos. Y fíjense ustedes que en CDC y también en cualquier DSpace se puede guardar el idioma de cada metadato. Y se expone para Google Scholar en nuestro caso, pero podría también indicarse tanto en OAI como en la interfaz OAI y en otras interfaces a través de un atributo XML lang. Y ahí está ejemplificado en OAI para un recurso que es este que está expresado a izquierdas de la pantalla y también en la web cómo debería expresarse. En un caso con XML lang, el idioma español, y en el otro. Sugerencia en cuanto a las traducciones. ¿Cómo estamos trabajando en este momento? A izquierdas ustedes pueden ver un artículo en el que estoy involucrada, que originalmente salió en inglés. Y guardamos ese recurso en nuestro repositorio, ya que la licencia nos permitía esta cuestión. Luego yo hice una traducción de ese trabajo y también se guardó ese recurso en el repositorio. ¿Cómo lo trabajamos a esto? En el recurso que es traducción, ponemos un campo libre de nota a través de un DC description, donde se indica que este artículo, la traducción al español, es una traducción del artículo original que estaba en inglés. Y también lo otro que hacemos es con un campo relation, que también ya precedentemente lo comentaron, que relaciona el campo relation, un ítem, con el otro ítem. Pero bien, a mí me parece que no nos parece, y es lógico tener en cuenta que una relación libre a través de un campo de esa descripción no es la mejor forma de comentar esto. Pero la limitante es que ni en Dublin Core existe algo específico, porque fíjense ustedes que lo más cercano es is based on o is basis for. Pero en ese caso no solamente puede ser una derivación, una traslación de algo, una adaptación, puede ser una interpretación. Y DataSci tampoco provee algo específico para el caso de la traducción. Bueno, aquí yo mostraba algunas opciones para exponer idiomas en relaciones, como por ejemplo podría ser a través de un campo XML lang, acompañando el href del archivo en cuestión y demás. Y también cómo hacer la exposición a través de un HTML o de un XML para un OAI. Nos quedan, y seguramente estará trabajando COAR y el grupo en este sentido, atender al problema de descubrir materiales de interés que no están ni en el idioma nativo ni en el otro, y cómo encontrar o generar una traducción de un trabajo que no está en mi idioma, y también cómo publicar en mi idioma nativo, que no sé inglés, y a pesar de eso, que esto impacte o alcance a un público global. Todos los problemas son bastante difíciles de resolver y los podemos enfocar de distintos lugares, pero lo importante logrado a partir de esta primera recomendación es que nosotros de este modo, con estas etiquetas y estas cuestiones, estamos dando soporte desde los metadatos para que otros puedan implementar los servicios en el futuro con el auxilio de estas etiquetas y demás. Si no tuviéramos eso, sería imposible. Así que bueno, eso nomás. Muchas gracias.
I'm sure you must have some questions or feedback to Marisa, because you can't be all silent all the session. Unless please, but maybe, do you mind if you come here and ask, because it's a little bit hard to hear for people. Sorry about that.
Well, I had a comment. First, I didn't understand all, and this is something that is very relevant of the usual habit that we took to speak in language that we usually use, which is English. And as for coming here, I'm very happy that we have taken this session in Spanish and French, and it awares things that we should really enhance this multilingual initiative, which I thank you for. And I will look through the PowerPoints if you are going to share them afterwards and go better understand the whole thing. Anyways, your presentation was much easier for me, but the first one was really hard. This was my comment.
Sorry about that. Thanks a lot, Marisa. So that was a teaser, what we encountered as challenges and use cases, and we have many more of them listed there. And now we'd like to show you what we suggest as recommendations. Shall I accept our, or what they do? Okay. I would like to show you all recommendations that we have so far and explain a little bit the logic behind some of them. Some of them are low-hanging fruit, some of them is something that you can immediately do in your repository, and some of them might be a little bit more aspirational. No, it doesn't move. Maybe I have to close. So we think that repository managers could take some actions already, and those actions were presented by Marisa and others today, which are about correct labeling of languages. And I don't think we need to repeat why correct labeling of languages is important, because it's important for findability, discoverability, and just proper curation practices. Yeah, it's just, I think when you start interfering with it, then you have to do it again. But when you remove something. Yeah, it's, yeah, no, yeah, no, it is. There is no works now. That's okay. Like titles are not important here. So recommendation is to declare the language of the resource at the item level. If you have an item in French, please indicate that it's French, because unfortunately, in many software platforms, default language will be English, and then your French record would be marked as English. Then if you have metadata in more than one language, but even if you have metadata in English only, it would be great if you could declare the language of metadata, and Pierre was showing, and also Marisa, how you can do it in the software. If you have title in French, then you'll say title in French. When you have title in English, you say this title in English. We had a lot of discussions about 2 or 3 letter language codes and which ISO standard to use. And we came up with a compromise which says that if you can, use a 2-letter code and ISO 639. If you can't, if your language is not a 2-letter, for example, Macedonian will be a 3-letter code language, then you'll have to use a 3-letter code. But then it creates an issue for software platforms, which was already mentioned, that some platforms only work with 2-letter codes. Then Milica was mentioning that enabling UTF-8 support in a repository is really important. And if you can, use original alphabet and original writing system. And please use Unicode UTF-8 for all metadata. If you have metadata in different languages, please use repeatable fields, and please don't put metadata in different languages in one field. Unfortunately, it's a common error, and there are reasons why this common error is, because there are certain limitations. But if you can, please do that in separate fields. Milica already mentioned personal names, that it's better to write them the way they're written in a deposited document. So for example, if you're depositing a document in Bulgarian, write that name in Bulgarian and use a persistent identifier such as ORCID to enable identification in other languages. Then if repository software supports multilingual interfaces, please set up the interface in your language. And also if you have English readers as an audience, also add English or more languages if needed. We also, this is a part where they aren't really actions anymore, because all previous activities could really be done with existing software. Our next recommendations are more like explorations. So the first one is to explore possibilities of integrating Wikidata. And Wikidata, if, like, for those of you who don't know, it's a free and collaborative knowledge base for multilingual keywords. It would be great if you could enable that in your repository, because that's a controlled vocabulary that would be useful. And then we have a long section about enabling recognition of translation and translated content. So these were recommendations for repository managers. We also have recommendations for repository software developers and repository platforms. So one of them was already mentioned about exposing the language of metadata via metadata exchange protocol. Providing support for multilingual keywords. It would be really great if that could be an area of activity of repository platforms. Then it would also be great if there is a real-time integration of Wikidata. For example, when a user starts typing in a metadata field, a keyword, then Wikidata term appears in a drop-down list for a user to select. And then it would be also great if automatic assignment of controlled terms could be enabled based on existing metadata, and then request to improve support for ISO language codes. For example, some languages do need 3-letter codes, and it would be good to have a better support on that. We also had discussion that it would be great if the language was already embedded in the document that a researcher creates. For example, when a researcher completes an article, then whatever tool she uses to write that article already captures information about the language in which that article was written, and then that could be picked up by platforms. So that was our aspiration, and we identified some ways of doing that, but it's clumsy and it takes a lot of efforts, and we describe those like existing possibilities now, but it would be great if in the future those who are developing tools for writing content could also think about possibility of specifying language in the document in which this content is created in text processing tools. Our recommendation also include descriptions of current functionalities of repository and software platforms. And I'm looking at Heather because we don't have Samvera here yet, but it would be great to work with you to include Samvera. And also if you use a software, repository software, which is not here yet, please contribute to use case, because it would be great to have them. And it's just an example that we don't only have recommendations and descriptions, we also have specific implementation guidance, how that could be done. So for example, how multilingual vocabularies and thesauri could be enabled in DSpace. And we also suggest that DSpace 7 configurable entities could be used as a way to implement control vocabularies in the repository. Yeah, and about Wikidata as keywords, we refer to existing examples. For example, in Europe, there is a Europeana portal that already implemented Wikidata in its services. And this is what we want to show you. And yeah, that's maybe a moment when it would be good not to have this bar at the end. So I'm saying we, but it's actually Ellen, and thanks a million, who copied our, I don't know how many pages of recommendations and descriptions into Commons Press, which we want to use to collect your feedback. So that would be a structure of this page where you can see a list of recommendations that I already mentioned. Then you have specific implementation examples on labeling of languages, recommendations on multilingual keywords, personal names, transliteration, translated content, text processing tools. And then we have appendixes with specific metadata standards and guidelines, and we have quite a comprehensive list of metadata standards and guidelines we've already included. But if you use a standard that is not there yet, please tell us and we'll include it. So we have like specific, really specific examples how this language would be declared on the resource level, or item level, metadata level, etc. We have a little bit more about these different ISO standards, because that's often a question. And then we have two suggestions how language code inconsistencies could be fixed in ePrints and DSpace. And if you know how those issues could be fixed in other software platforms, please also talk to us. So what we need to do with this website is to clean up some headings, and then I think maybe next week or in 2 weeks' time, we'll send an email to everyone saying that it would be great if you could read, comment, and yeah, make sure that what we recommend is really useful. We also looked at whether there is a use case for accepting machine translated content in repositories, and we decided that we would rather write a blog than include that in our report. So we would very much like to hear your feedback about that blog as well. if you're coming to Open Repositories, we'll have a half-a-day workshop, which is called Good Practices to Support Non-English and Multilingual Content. We also want to repackage the current version of the report that we have, maybe, which is kind of generic, and then it includes examples from different software. We want to repackage it. So, for example, if you only manage a DSpace repository, you can read the same report with your DSpace repository lenses or ePrints repository lenses, so that it would be maybe easier for you. Then you don't need to read everything. You don't need to read about ePrints, which if you're not interested in other software platforms. So that's what we'll be doing. And we will also be working with DSpace steering group to create a wish list for DSpace 8 to enable better multilingual support in DSpace 8.